Let's talk about inspiration and ideas. Where does music or the idea for a piece or for an essay, a poem, a painting, a novel, where does that idea come from? What constitutes an idea? How can an idea be treated so that it evolves from an idea into the finished work? What are the expectations implied in an idea for that finished work? Are there expectations? Can you examine an initial idea and anticipate what the end will be? How do we think about those ideas and take them from sort of an initial state into something that we can then craft and work on? And I think this is very different of course, for everybody. I'm not sure if it's that different across media, whether it's music or painting or sculpture. I think the idea perhaps unfolds and emerges from this imaginative zone in a way that may be independent from the execution. The substance of the execution, whether that's paint or sound or words. So I'll speak for me, and maybe that has some resonance with you and how you work with ideas. But I'm starting from two things. I wrote in one of my essays that the greatest gift that an artist can have is a question that is sufficiently captivating and difficult to sustain many, many different efforts to answer it, and that each piece of music or each essay, each work of art is another go at answering that question. And that the reason the question is such a gift is that it provides an interface to the initial impulse of the idea, which can be really quite unformed, but absolutely compelling. There's like a twitch or an itch that says idea. Maybe it's a newspaper article, or in my case, I'm often inspired by things like this. This is a selection of data realizations, old-fashioned data realizations of like the longest rivers in the world, or the highest mountains, comparative representations of geologic scale. And it is not to say that my music is inspired by this, but I find these kinds of forms particularly engaging, captivating, meaningful. When I first come up with an idea, or when an idea first appears to me, I need a way that I can return back to it, like a seed that then I can set aside until I have time at my desk in front of paper to actually write it down. When I used to run longer distances, I would be out in the middle of a 2-3 hour training run, 15 or 20 miles. Do the math. I wasn't a fast runner, but I was persistent. An idea would come to me for a piece of music. And by the time I got home, I simply couldn't recall the idea, no matter how wonderful and complete it might have appeared at the time. I needed a way to encapsulate the idea in a seed, almost like one of those old toys that you dropped in water and then they turned into a horse or something like that. I needed to be able to distill the first idea into something that I could remember, and that then when I sat at my desk and dropped it, it would unfold like origami or something like that. And I like geologic imagery. I don't I'm not a geologist. I don't know any of this stuff. But I find the idea of geologic aeons and the naming of geologic events to be something that I can hold on to, that point back to that original idea. In the same way, perhaps, that a liturgical concept might point back to an original creative idea, or a couple of words might be enough to point back to the original idea, where the original idea may well have been lost without those pointers. My initial ideas tend to feel very gestural. They tend to feel very much like twitches around my body, and very difficult to articulate in detail. But in general, here's a good example. I have probably written half a dozen pieces of music where what I'm really trying to do is answer the question of, what if you were very, very far and loud and very, very near and quiet? Or you have two lines. One is near and far and one is loud and quiet. And what's happening when you are near and quiet or near and loud, whether it's chords or melodies or rhythms, and what happens when you are far apart and loud or quiet? Are you moving in parallel? Are you rhythmically aligned, or is there a lot of syncopation? With that simple question, I've tackled several pretty large sets of pieces. That question is an articulation of an intuition, a little twitch that just says there's a piece of music here. Earlier in the year, I finished a piece of music for piano that is titled "Study After the North American Glaciation." I think this is what Liszt is doing in his Année de Pèlerinage, all the Italian pieces with very, music after attending a lecture on Dante, music after Faust. It's not so much that he's programmatically recreating the event, which is certainly not what I'm saying. My music isn't programmatic, but the title and the concept is a pointer back to the original idea. So the titles are important for the audience, the listener, to know. For me, I think very important. Not because they give a programmatic overview of the piece and say, well, this section is this river and this section is a shorter river, maybe a deeper river. Nothing like that. It's another way of applying a level of meaning to the music. And why not use that? Why not take advantage of an extra bit of poetic context? Particularly if that context has helped me in the first case to remember what it was that arrived. Because the creative idea, in many ways, is no different from thoughts in general. Our thoughts arise from where? Do this the next time you're sitting quietly and you're thinking. Look at the thought and say, where did that thought come from? Is there a thinker? Is there a little thought machine that I'm controlling, that you're controlling? And if you think you found one, take a look at it. See, where is it? How is it constituted? What is it making thoughts out of? What will your next thought be? And then of that field, that diorama of thoughts, which ones demand a creative response? Which of those ideas say, write music, write a poem? Why are they... what's different about the characteristic of those thoughts? I don't know the answer to that. I think, and I pay attention, but I miss it. I don't understand yet. But what I do know is I will feel a thought, and it won't be a thought that lines up specifically with people, places, things, objects, work I need to do. And maybe that's the clue that this is something that needs to be precipitated just a little bit into a form that I can hold on to until I'm at my desk and have time to lay it out. I find this atlas here beautiful and inspirational. I also found sort of sporting diagrams. Like, I'm not much of a football fan, but the constructs that coaches use with the X's and O's to move on the field, I find those quite elegant. Like chess openings or patterns on a Go board. Those are the kinds of things that can be applied onto the initial kind of inarticulate nudge of a creative idea. And then from there, the question is, what did that mean? And I write it down. I don't, for me, definitely, and I don't know really anybody who really does have a true plan of a piece when we start. I might think that I want to write a piece that alternates sections. And it's possible that at the end, write something very general like that. I want to write a gavotte, or a rondo, right? Some Baroque form. And I do think that sometimes. And every once in a while, the piece ends up as a nice Baroque form of alternating, repeating sections. But more often than not, I find out that I'm actually writing two different pieces at the same time, and I just hadn't extricated them from each other. And the idea of starting with an idea and thinking and knowing right from the beginning, right from the onset, what it's going to do, maybe I have an idea. And certainly by the time I've poked around for a bit, I can start to go in and out of a piece at different points, because now I do have an idea. But it doesn't start like that for me. It starts as something that I have to come back to repeatedly and say, well, what was that? And then build that out a bit. What was this? Build that out a bit. What was this? Build that out a bit. Asking it, what is this? And often what comes out is something that in the end doesn't belong there. It belongs in another piece, or it just is something that's never going to be used. But it has to start with something, and whether that's a list of the comparative lengths of rivers or of mountains, or whether it's a football schematic, or whether it's an evocative headline from a newspaper article. That's what I think those titles give us. They give us access back to the idea, which again is different from being a programmatic structure. Like, I'm going to musically represent my walk from here to the coffee shop. Here I am in the garden. Here I am on the street. Here I am getting my coffee. No, not like that. But maybe the idea of walking to the coffee shop just references the memory of an initial idea. I think that's how we remember things. We don't often remember the thing itself. We remember something that points us to what we want to remember. That's how a memory palace works. We come up with very vivid ideas that are in that moment conjoined with what we want to remember, and so we don't forget what we want to remember. Again, this is very interesting. I think I'd be happy to hear your thoughts, your ideas on the initial creative impulse, how you remember them. Perhaps you are someone who sits down and really has a full end-to-end idea of a piece of music, in which case that's very different from what I'm saying, I think, and I'd be curious to hear how you start and write that all out to begin with. What's the documentation of the initial idea that we all work with? Anyway, with that, keep your wits about you. Like, subscribe. I'm trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I've been hovering around 750 or 800 for 2 years now. So if you're listening to this and you haven't subscribed, do that. And if you're listening to this, if you have subscribed, you must know 5 friends who would like to subscribe. So